Shalom Aleichem, everybody. We are continuing with our series of virtual Divrei Torah. I'd like to start off by wishing all those in need of a refuah shlema, they should have a refuah shlema b'karov, and all those in need of a nechama, of a consolation, should have a consolation. This week we are reading Parshas Pinchas, which deals with the act of zealotry done by Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. As we read in the end of the previous parsha, Parshas Balak, the daughters of Midian and the daughters of Moab, at the advice of Bilam, as a way to get to the Jewish people, were successfully, unfortunately, seducing Jewish men and getting them to worship idols. And as a result, a plague had broken out amongst the Jewish people. And at that point, Zimri ben Salu, a prince of the tribe of Shimon, as part of this widespread sinfulness, had taken a Midianite princess, Cosby, the daughter of Tzur, and was going to cohabit with her, virtually in public in front of Moshe and Aaron and all the elders. And Pinchas, Aaron's grandson, stepped up and he slew Zimri and he slew Cosby, and as a result of that, he stopped the plague that had broken out amongst the Jewish people. So that's at the end of last week's parsha, and then brings us to the beginning of this week's parsha, where Hashem essentially is giving a yashakach to Pinchas for doing what he did and letting him know that as a result of that act of zealotry that he committed, that stopped the plague that had broken out amongst the Jewish people. And when Hashem says he's giving a yashakach to Pinchas, the pasuk says that Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen heshivis chamasim yal bnei Yisrael b'kanos kinasi b'socham, which translates, it was Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, turned aside my wrath, God says, from the Jewish people when he committed this act of zealotry amongst them. And Rashi, in the name of Chazal, take note of the fact that it gives the full yichus of Pinchas all the way back to his grandfather. The question is why? So Rashi brings that the other tribes were disparaging Pinchas and saying, who did this kid think he is? He killed a prince, Zimri, amongst Israel. Who does he think he is? After all, who is his maternal grandfather? It's Yisro. Otherwise known as Putiel, because from the word pitam, he fattened calves to sacrifice to idols. He was the idolatrous priest, as we know originally Yisro was. And so here he is, this kid with his grandfather, who is a priest to idols and idolatry. He's going to come along and kill a prince amongst Israel. He thinks he's so righteous. What a chutzpah! What an outrageous act! An outrageous act of violence he committed. So Hashem says, no. The Torah comes and says it's Misyachisim after Aaron HaKohen. But the question is, okay, so we know on one side his grandfather was Aaron, that's very nice, and his other side, his maternal side, his grandfather was Putiel, was Yisro. But how does this really answer up, if you will, or deal with the complaint that people had that his maternal grandfather was a former priest of idolatry, and who does he think he is, coming and slaying a prince amongst Israel? So I believe it's actually the Baal Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, Reb Shlomo Gansfried. It's a very beautiful perush on Chumash called Sefer HaPirion. He explains the following: that essentially the other tribes were explaining or accusing, is a better word, that you know why Pinchas committed this act of violence. You know where this violence comes from, this violent tendency and violent streak in Pinchas comes from? It comes from his maternal grandfather, who is an idolatrous priest, and that's where this violence comes from. It essentially comes from a non-Jewish source. This is not a Jewish way to act, to commit an act of violence like this, and it's really he acted in just an outrageous, inappropriate fashion. That's what the other tribes were condemning him. That was their accusation. So therefore, Hashem and the Torah comes along and says, no, it's Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. You know where this comes from? It's not because his grandfather is a former idolatrous priest. That's where this violent act came from. No, just the opposite. It's coming from the other side. It's coming from his paternal grandfather, from Aaron HaKohen. As the Mishnah in Avos says, who is Aaron? Aaron is the quintessential Ohev Shalom V'Rodev Shalom. He's a lover of peace and one who pursues peace. He's the ultimate model and paradigm for peace. But the Torah is telling us, and Hashem is telling us, and that's why, in fact, the reward for Pinchas' act of zealotry is that hineni nosin lo es brisi shalom. I'm going to give him my covenant of peace, and he's going to join the kahuna of Aaron, because actually, even though he's descended from Aaron, he wasn't, as our rabbis tell us, he was not yet a Kohen, because God made only Aaron and his sons, and any grandsons that would be born to their sons after that point in time, into Kohanim. But Pinchas was a grandson who had already been born before the kuna was bestowed upon the family of Aaron, and therefore at this point he was not yet a priest. It was only as a result of his act of zealotry that God included him and made him a Kohen as well. So the Torah and Hashem is telling us that no, you shouldn't think that this act of violence came just from simply a barbaric or violent streak that could be attributed to his uh, maternal grandfather, who's a former idolatrous priest. No, the Torah is telling us no, it came from the other side. It came from Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the high priest, Aaron who was the quintessential Ohev Shalom and Rodev Shalom. But the Torah and Hashem is telling us sometimes, unfortunately, in order to have real peace, sometimes you have to commit an act of which is really the opposite of peace. In other words, bekanos kinosi b'socham. He had to, and it was appropriate to commit an act of kanos and to stop the orgy essentially of sin that had overtaken and the spirit of folly that had overtaken the Jewish people, and to stand up against the stream and stand up against the mob, if you will, and to say, come back to your senses. This is not allowed and this is not appropriate. And it's because of that strong stance of Pinchas that really real peace was restored to the Jewish people. The plague was stopped and real peace was returned to the Jewish people, not only peace amongst Jews, but peace between the Jewish people and their Father in heaven, where that relationship had been ruptured as a result of their sinful behavior. So it was really Pinchas' act of zealotry which led to real peace. And that's a lesson for us in general. It's sometimes, everyone likes to, get along and go along to get along. But sometimes, unfortunately, the mob, if you will, or society is going in a direction where it's appropriate to take, a strong, unpopular stance. But that's what's necessary to bring people back to their senses, if you will, and to really stand up against a mob which has lost its senses and is going in the wrong direction. In other words, you have to take a strong principled stand, even if it's not popular, even if it's going to result in a person's derision and ridicule, as it did with Pinchas. But Hashem is saying, no, Pinchas, you stepped up. You took a strong position for what's right and what's proper, even though it was very unpopular and you received tremendous scorn and derision because of it. But nevertheless, as a result of your strong stand, even though it could be seen as, oh, why are you taking such a strong stand? Why don't you just go along to get along, right? That's peace. No, Hashem is saying going along to get along is not peace. What brings real peace, true and lasting peace, is taking a principled stand for what's right and what's proper and what's godly. And then if you take that strong stand, hopefully you bring people back to their senses, then order is restored and society can function properly, and then there's harmony once again, not only between people, but between God and his creations, and that brings about true and lasting peace. Is when people behave according to God's law and behave appropriately and morally. Then you have a truly just and peaceful society. So we shouldn't be cowed or intimidated by what's popular or what's the mob wants or demands, but we should take a strong and principled stand for what's good and what's right and truly good and right. And that's principled stand, although it might not be popular. People say, "Oh, you're being argumentative and obstinate," whatever pejoratives people would sling at us. But nevertheless, we know we're taking a stand for what's right. And really, that's ultimately what brings true peace, not just going along with a mob. That's not peace. True peace is standing up for what's right, asserting what's right, and hopefully waking the mob up out of their stupor and having them come back to behaving properly. Then civil order will be returned, and a proper society will begin to function properly. Again, very important lesson that we learn from Pinchas' strong stand against the mob, if you will, and he stood up for what's right, and eventually that brought true and lasting peace. Very important lesson. Later in the parsha, we learn, or the Torah teaches us, has the parsha of the carbon tamid, the daily sacrifice, which we bring one sheep on the altar in the Mishkan and later in the Beis Hamikdash, one sheep in the morning on a daily basis and one sheep in the afternoon. That's called the carbon tamid, the daily sacrifice. And it goes from there to discuss the karbanos musaf. The various musaf means additional sacrifices that are brought in the Beis Hamikdash and in the Mishkan on special days such as Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, all the holidays. And the question is, why does the Torah group together these two sacrifices, these two types of sacrifices? They really seem to be, in a certain sense, polar opposites. You have the daily sacrifice, which happened every day, as the name implies, rain or shine, if you will, 354 days a year in the Jewish lunar calendar. And then you have the karbanos. It's followed right away by the musaf offerings, which are special offerings for special occasions, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, holidays. These two sets of offerings. It's odd that the Torah discusses them really in one section back to back. You would think the carbon musaf should be in one section, the special sacrifices, and then the daily sacrifice. That's quote unquote, maybe you could say, God forbid, not as exciting. That happens on a daily basis. But in other words, why lump them all together? They seem to be really studying contrasts as opposed to really fitting together in one section. And I think the answer is the following, which is the Torah is essentially telling us that you need both ingredients to have a successful life and to have a successful spiritual life. You need the daily grind, if you will. In other words, the consistency as embodied by the carbon tamid. That has to be the basis. In fact, that comes first. In other words, but in addition to that, we also have special occasions. We have Shabbos, we have Rosh Chodesh, we have the holidays. In other words, which we go beyond the ordinary, something very special, which lifts us up and motivates us and inspires us beyond the norm. So really, life is about balancing the two. In other words, we're not just vanilla, if you will, that every day is just exactly the same. No, but on the other hand, we have special occasions. So it's really a balance of the two. You have to have your consistency. That has to be the basis. That's the carbon tamid. But the Torah is also saying that each day is we have to kind of add something new, a musaf, something additional, something that we didn't have yesterday. Each day has to bring something special and unique. And obviously, the holidays and Shabbos themselves, by definition, are of a unique and an especially uplifted nature. So the Torah is saying is a balance here. It's not only just plain vanilla consistency on the one hand, but it's also not just the highs, if you will, of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. They have to work together in concert. We have to experience the highs. We have to enjoy the special occasions, and it's important to relish them and to be uplifted by them and to take in and absorb all these special holidays and occasions that the Jewish calendar has to offer, and really enjoy it to the max, if you will, and be inspired to the max. But we also have to bear in mind that we have to couple that with a consistency of the carbon tamid. So it's a balance. You really need both as part of our service in God. The consistency, that really has to be the basis, and that's why the carbon tamid is mentioned first. But in addition to that, we have to always be looking for new and inspiring experiences to uplift the day to day and to couple that with our discipline consistency. It's interesting to note that there's a machlokes. Tanoim, actually, what are the most important psukim in the Torah? So famously, Rabbi Akiva says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha zeh klal gadol b'Torah." You should love your neighbor as yourself. That's a basic principle in the entire Torah, and there's other opinions as well. But the Medrash brings an opinion of Shimon ben Pazi, who says, what's the most in a certain sense, if you can even say such a thing, a basic principle of the Torah is hakeves echad taseh b'boker v'hakeves hasheni taseh ben arbaim. The verse of the daily sacrifice, which says you shall bring one sheep in the morning as part of the daily sacrifice and one sheep in the afternoon. And the question is, how could that be the most important verse in the whole Torah, or basic principle? So the commentaries explain that no, the idea of consistency, of day in and day out, doing what you have to do, that's really foundational, and that's what underlies the entirety of the Torah. So that's why the Torah mentions the carbon tamid first. You have to have that consistency, that kind of a discipline, if you will, to do what has to be done on a daily basis. But then the Torah says that by itself is not sufficient. You have to get the inspiration of special occasions, of the carbon musaf, of the additional special occasions of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh and Yontif, and always look for some kind of hischadshus, something new in your avodas Hashem, to go from high to height, from height to height, if you will, from chayil el chayil. So we have to really incorporate and have the balance of the two. The consistency, the carbon tamid on the one hand, as Shimon ben Pazi says, that has to be the basis. But in addition to that, the Torah is saying, coupled with the carbon tamid, you need the carbon musaf, you need those special occasions, that special inspiration that we derive from those special occasions, and help it uplift our day-to-day service and give a special flavor to our day-to-day service as well. So again, a very important lesson, how to live a proper balanced life, consistency coupled with new experiences, and God willing, with that balance, we will live a properly inspired life, and will be zocha to not only take the lessons of the Karbanos to heart, but it will be zocha with Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu, that will be zocha to the Binyan Bayis Hashlishi, where we'll actually bring these Karbanos in actuality, the Karban Taman on a daily basis, and the Karbanos Musaf on the special occasions. May we be zocha to that time. Meher B'Yameinu, Amen. Have a great Shabbos.